Good evening, folks. We have snow, we have ice, but we also have our Bibles open. And the class for tonight is found in Judges chapter 7. I want to begin with 4 fast facts. This is after the death of Joshua and before the time of Samuel, Saul, and David. Also, this is after the conquest led by Joshua. The tribes were sent to their assigned locations in the Promised Land. Now, there is no central government. The people were to obey God as divinely legislated in the law of Moses. And number 4, this is important. They were not only not to associate with the Canaanites, they were to drive them out and shun any influence from those former pagan inhabitants of the land. Here's one passage that makes that very clear in Exodus chapter 23 and verse 33 in today's English version. Do not let those people live in your country. If you do, they will make you sin against me. If you worship their gods, it will be a fatal trap for you. So, the Israelites are in the Promised Land after the death of Joshua. They're obligated for their good and God's glory to follow the law God gave them and not be drawn into the sinful ways of the Canaanites. In a college course I took in Old Testament history many years ago, the textbook was The Heart of Hebrew History by H.I. Hester. And I want to share with you something he wrote in that textbook introductory to the period of the Judges. Hester said, the period which we now enter is known as the Dark Ages of Hebrew history. It is characterized by such words as apostasy, decline, disorder, demoralization. It was a time of decline in all areas of life, economic, political, social, moral, religious. It was a time of compromise and acceptance of many of God's people of the ideals and standards of their pagan neighbors. The oft-repeated statement in this book is, the children of Israel did that which was evil in the sight of Jehovah. I want to mention that one primary lesson we learn from Judges is God can carry out His purposes through people who may not be fully aware of His purposes. And in every case, these people are not perfect. This can be said of every person we meet in Judges. None were perfect. They were people like us in many cases. There were some who came from guilt of sin to obedient faith, and they experienced victory from God in very dramatic ways. Nationally, there was apostasy and decline. Tonight, we're going to be in Judges chapter 7, and we're going to be reading the story of Gideon. In Judges chapter 7. I may take a break somewhere in the reading. It's a long chapter, but I'm reading Judges chapter 7 from the Christian Standard Bible. Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the troops who were with him got up early and camped beside the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them, below the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many troops for me to hand the Midianites over to you, or else Israel might elevate themselves over me and say, I saved myself. Now announce to the troops, whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 of the troops turned back, but 10,000 remained. Then the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many troops. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. If I say to you, this one can go with you, he can go. But if I say about anyone, this one cannot go with you, he cannot go. So he brought the troops down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, separate everyone who laps water with his tongue like a dog, and do the same with everyone who kneels to drink. The number of those who lapped with their hands to their mouths was 300, and all the rest of the troops knelt to drink water. The Lord said to Gideon, I will deliver you with the 300 men who lapped and hand the Midianites over to you, but everyone else is to go home. So Gideon sent all the Israelites to their tents, but kept the 300 troops, who took the provisions and their ram's horns, some translations trumpets. The camp of Midian was below him in the valley. Verse 9. That night, the Lord said to him, get up and attack the camp, for I have handed it over to you. But if you are afraid to attack the camp, go down with Purah, your servant, listen to what they say, and then you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So he went down with Purah, his servant, to the outpost of the troops who were in the camp. Now, the Midianites, Amalekites, and all the people of the east had settled down in the valley like a swarm of locusts, and their camels were innumerable as the sand on the seashore. Verse 13, when Gideon arrived, there was a man telling his friend about a dream. He said, listen, I had a dream. A loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp, struck the tent, and it fell. The loaf turned the tent upside down so that it collapsed. His friend answered, this is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, the Israelite. God has handed the entire Midianite camp over to them. Verse 15, when Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship. He returned to Israel's camp and said, get up, for the Lord has handed the Midianite camp over to you. Then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies and gave each of the men a ram's horn in one hand and an empty pitcher with a torch inside in it in the other hand. Verse 17, watch me, he said to them, and do what I do. When I come out to the outpost of the camp, do as I do. When I and everyone with me blow our ram's horns, trumpets, you are also to blow your ram's horns all around the camp. Then you will say, for the Lord and for Gideon. Gideon and the 100 men who were with him went to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch after the sentries had been stationed. They blew their ram's horns and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew their ram's horns and shattered their pitchers. They held their torches in their left hands and their ram's horns to blow in their right hands, and they shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Each Israelite took his position around the camp, and the entire Midianite army began to run, and they cried out as they fled. When Gideon's men blew their 300 ram's horns, and the Lord caused the men in the whole army to run on each other with their swords, they fled in Achaia. In the Acacia house, I should say, in the direction of Zerah, as far as the border of Abel Melholah near Tabbath. Then the men of Israel were called from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh, and they pursued the Midianites. I'm at verse 24. Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim with this message: come down to intercept the Midianites and take control of the water courses ahead of them as far as Beth-bara and the Jordan. So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they took control of the water courses as far as Beth-bara and the Jordan. They captured Oreb and Zeb, the two princes of Midian. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb and Zeb at the winepress of Zeb. While they were pursuing the Midianites, they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon across the Jordan. That's the reading of the story of Gideon in Judges chapter 7. Let's discuss that now. When it comes to military strategy, there are accounts in the Bible of divine methods and approaches that God conceived, not in humanly written coursework at West Point, for example, not that men came up with, but that God conceived. There are human military plans and methods developed through centuries of combat, refined every generation. Today we have drones and satellites and human military strategies developed through trial and error, far higher than the human military intellect and systems is God's power and means that we read about often in these Old Testament battles. Think about it. What group of War Department leaders would come up with marching around Jericho? David defeated Goliath with a few rocks launched from a shepherd's sling. There's Sennacherib's siege in 701 BC. Moses' hands being held up, Exodus 17. Samson, we'll study that in a few weeks. West Point teachers teach strategy and methods proven in battle history to be effective on a human experience level. Human strategy, revised and revised again every generation. God, in battle mode in these Old Testament battles, is at a position far higher than what human wisdom conceives. And God is perfect in His methods, no matter how odd they may sound to men. Human typical wisdom is to calculate how many soldiers and how much equipment is necessary to achieve the victory. Even Jesus said in Luke 14:31, what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000. So God, in the book of Judges, in these battle scenarios, if you take God out of the equation in Judges 7, and you've just got human wisdom and human experience led by Gideon and a few men, they're headed for defeat. What if God had said, Gideon, it's up to you. Gather up a few of your guys and go out and come up with something. I'll check with you later. Wouldn't have worked. God says to Gideon, as battle against the Midianites is being planned, the people are too many for me to give the Midianites into your hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand saved me. There was a very common human disposition God wanted to hold in check. We're going to talk about that. You might imagine Israelite leaders and soldiers saying, if they had followed their own plan, look at what we did. We came up with this method, and look how great we were. We overwhelmed them by our might. We outnumbered them. We are stronger, smarter. The victory is ours. God didn't want to hear anybody say that. Verse 2, God would hand the Midianites over. God would do this, and He'd do it His way. Thus, no Israelites could elevate themselves and boast. God's superior plan is to make it obvious that they didn't do it on their own. Like the trembling soldiers go home, 22,000 of them returned, then 10,000 remain, and you get down to 300. That's a massive reduction. God said, not too many, just the 300. Well, here's something else that you're not going to hear at West Point or the Army War College when you get to verses 4 through 7. Did you hear the equipment list in verses 4 through 7? There's going to be a test to see who can get water the best way for military vigilance. The number of those who lapped with their hands in their mouths was 300 men, and then they're going to take provisions and pitchers and trumpets. Wait a minute. You don't need swords and javelins and spears and all the necessary gear of battle. No, this is God's battle, His methods. 300 men qualified. Yes, they lapped water. An important part comes next in verse 9. That next day the Lord said, "Arise, go down to the camp, for I have given it into your hand." Emphasis on who would give the victory. The Lord. Gideon and his lappers were recipients of God's grace. Active? Oh yes. But they were not the power that brought the victory. Verses 10 to 14. Verses 10 to 14. If you are afraid to attack camp, go down with Purah, your servant. And there is this dream. Now, what is God doing in this dream of a loaf of bread falling down and crushing a tent? He's giving Gideon confidence. The fleece in chapter 6, the dream in chapter 7, giving Gideon confidence that obviously he was open to. Verse 15, as soon as Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, what did he do? He worshiped. He went back to the camp then and said to his lappers, "Arise, for the Lord has given the host of Midian into your hand. Trumpets, jars, and torches. No swords, no spears, no grenades. Trumpets, jars, and torches." Victory, verses 19 to 25. Victory in verses 19 to 25. Folks, this is a true story that exhibits God's power and God's grace, exposing also the helplessness of men, causing Gideon to worship. And leaving us with this memorable phrase, a sword for the Lord and a sword for Gideon. Can we go to our takeaways now? Let me see if I can pull those up. Takeaways. God strengthens faith when it needs strengthening, and the hearts of the weak are open. Say again. God strengthens faith when it needs strengthening, and the hearts of the weak are open. Gideon winds up in Hebrews 11, in that roll call of obedient faith, but he didn't start there. When you read his story back in chapter 6 and chapter 7, he's not a tower of strength and perfection. God, however, is profoundly perceptive of what Gideon needs, and Gideon becomes open to increasing his faith through the fleece and through the dream. So I'm saying he wasn't always the Hebrews 11 man, but he was open to have his faith developed. Are you open to have your faith develop deeper? I cannot say, none of us can say we've always been exactly what we should be. We've always been lined up with allegiance to God and obedient faith perfectly. In fact, at times, our imperfection, our neglect, our shallow discipleship, we are painfully aware of, leading us to repent and realign ourselves with Christ. Gideon and the others in Hebrews 11 came to obedient faith from a place of sin and guilt. May all of us be open to have our faith developed and become stronger, not weaker over time. God is willing to strengthen the weak, but we need to be open to that. It's very easy for our faith to weaken over time just by inattention. Let your commitment decline gradually. We need to constantly examine ourselves and acknowledge our weakness and be open to having God strengthen us through His Word, through things that happen to us, and through wearing the whole armor of God, giving Him the glory and the praise. So number one, God strengthens faith, but we need to be open to that growth. Takeaway number two, the account here in Judges 7 illustrates a weakness. It illustrates a weakness of the flesh we need to be warned about. That is the false confidence that we put sometimes in numbers, overestimating the value of numbers. Maybe you remember me saying before, I believe there's a tendency to become infatuated with numbers. A tendency to become infatuated with numbers. This historical account illustrates how man can become laser focused on numbers in a way detrimental to reality and spiritual value. Here's what we sometimes do. We talk about big churches and small churches as if the number of members equals strength. Let me ask you, there were 7 churches of Asia in Revelation chapters 1 to 3. How small or big were those churches? We have no indication. Okay, how many members in Corinth, in Ephesus, Thessalonica, Philippi? We don't know. Can a local church of 5 people be strong and healthy and active? Of course they can. See, we can if we are not disciplined in our thinking. We can become laser focused on numbers and buildings and budgets and be weakened by those immature fascinations. Strength is found in the commitment and unity of the people. Many people are a few who are aligned with God's will. Takeaway number 3. When we come to a place of good outcome, victory, and success in the Lord's work, we must determine with all our might to take no credit. Take no credit. Look what I've done. Look at what we've done. That should never be said. What place is there for boasting? Paul writes extensively in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 20 through 31 about how boastful men can be, about what they perceive they have accomplished that they didn't accomplish. The gospel is seed. We can put that seed into the hearts of men and women. We can put that seed in soil. We can take no credit for the harvest. God knew the tendency of the Israelites who were near the Midianite camp. He knows our temptations and tendencies perfectly to boast. When we come to a place of good outcome, victory and success in the Lord's work, we must determine with all of our might we will take no credit. We are like Gideon's army in this respect. All we have is trumpets and pitchers and torches. But those things won't win a single victory without God's power acting through our faith. One commentator said, human nature is such that if there is the tiniest opportunity to boast in our work, we will, and we will look foolish. Number 4. 2 of the most important words in Judges 7. Look at verse 15. Gideon, in this process, came to a place where he worshiped. May it be so with us that every good outcome in our work, every success, every little step forward, every major victory or small victory strengthens our motivation to worship God in spirit and in truth, in life, in words, in collective activity, worshiping Him from the inside out, in spirit and in truth. Todd said something a few weeks ago. I don't remember if it was just to me or in a class or sermon. It is not wrong to know that you need more confidence. It is not wrong to know that you need more confidence. What's wrong is to try and get that confidence from the wrong source. There is in the world offered to us self-confidence and confidence in numbers and confidence in human wisdom, failed sources of confidence. Set your confidence firmly in God and His promises and His Word, Christ and what He did, and the words given in the Bible by the Holy Spirit. That's the confidence we need. And again, in reading the names in Hebrews 11, every single person named in Hebrews 11 came from sin and guilt to faith and obedience. I hope that this lesson has been helpful to us, and I hope that the weather warms up for all of us. Thank you.